So over the past few days in particular, but really throughout the month of June, I've really been noticing the rise in and the very striking prevalence of just transphobia in general, in terms of laws being passed in America or bills being proposed or just stuff in general coming out. I wouldn't even necessarily say that, again, in the past few days in particular, it's become almost a daily occurrence. It really has just become a daily occurrence that I'm coming across this kind of thing. In fact, many days I'm coming across as many as 2 or 3 different separate things, just completely randomly. Not necessarily that I'm looking for it or I'm looking it up, I'm just kind of coming across it. And one of the things that I came across just a few hours ago, which I think, I don't even necessarily say particularly bad, given that virtually everything that I've seen, if not everything, has been atrocious, but the most recent thing that I've came across has been Ricky Gervais's comedy skit, which was done about 2 weeks ago, just before Pride Month. And again, like the fact that a lot of these laws have only came out or been proposed for Pride Month, I do believe that this skit, at least this part in particular, was planned to kind of coincide with Pride Month. But yeah, anyway, the skit is really nothing new. You don't really need to watch it. It's basically just going over the same kind of vulgar and crude jokes that have been made against trans people in the trans community for as long as such jokes have existed. Joking about bathrooms, about how trans women are predators or they're predatory or they could be predatory, kind of calling them men, misgendering them, laughing at the fact that they have penises, laughing at their appearance. Just, again, it really kind of hits at all of the big cliches you'd expect, and of course unfortunately gets laughs from the audience. And of course, with someone as influential as Ricky Gervais being a massive comedian with millions of followers, a big following, saying something like this, naturally there's been controversy on both sides, with people becoming offended at it, saying that it's transphobic, that it's bigotry, that it's discriminatory and such things. And again, as I'm saying, that it's simply vulgar and crude. And then from the other side, you'll get people kind of pointing at that kind of offence, the fact that people are taking offence at these jokes and saying such things that Ricky Gervais, as he has said in the past, will attack anyone, will make fun of any kind of category, any kind of group, that will attack trans people, will also attack Christians, attack atheists, will attack gay people, attack straight people, that he holds nothing sacred and will make fun of anything, and that bigotry or transphobia doesn't come into it, that it is simply just a joke and that it's done purely for the sake of comedy. And those are kind of the arguments for both sides. And I really want to point out how it's not necessarily anything intrinsic to transphobia or making fun of trans women, but in this particular social setting, how making fun of trans people against any other group that I could think of is particularly harmful. And I want to use, before attacking it directly, to use an analogy about if such jokes were to be said about gay men today. For example, if Ricky Gervais was to do the exact same skit about gay men, again, kind of growing the same things, bathrooms are predatory, and being predators, and kind of, again, like the trans thing, just the things that have been laughed at about gay men, made fun of gay men, and the way that gay men have been attacked throughout the decades. Well, I can see that that would be somewhat bigoted, somewhat homophobic, of course. I think the comedy offence, and the offence that it is purely for jokes, it is purely for a laugh, stands up a lot more strongly in that case. Even if the exact same jokes were pretty much just made, but kind of changed slightly, even if it was just as bigoted, just as homophobic. Well, I can understand someone getting offended at that, someone attacking that. I do think that there's a completely different context there, which, while it might be somewhat problematic, it's nowhere near as kind of nasty or toxic about the same jokes being made about trans women. And to really emphasise this, I could say, for example, say you have two scenarios where Ricky Gervais was to make that kind of joke in 2022, whether it's if he was to make it 60 or 70 or even 50 years ago, back in the 60s, back in the 50s, back in the 70s even, or even the 80s. If he was to make such jokes then, of course, they'd still be homophobic, but particularly making those jokes in the 50s, the 60s again, even the 70s or 80s, when homophobia was much more prevalent, and where the kind of jokes that he would be making would be in vogue in terms of people's actual opinion. Making jokes about gay men being predators, being predatory in 2022, well, it's a bit vulgar and low class. There are relatively at least few people who will believe that, and if not necessarily believing it, will take it as seriously as to heart. Whether it's in the 50s and 60s, that was definitely the belief that was in vogue, and people did take it to heart. The kind of idea that all gay men, or most gay men, were predatory, that they were predators, and that they would prey on people. And this is why the joke is different. And again, I think even people who would kind of viciously attack it in 2022 for being homophobic would have to admit that even if everything is exactly the same, the joke was exactly the same, it was written the same way, it was presented the same way, the audience reaction was exactly the same, everything was the same as much as it could be, except from the simple fact that in one case it was told in 2020, and say another it was told in 1952. The example where it's told in 1952 is almost incomprehensibly worse. It is much more vicious and much more evil, because whether it's in 2022 it comes up as more as a joke, in the 1950s it is instilling real hatred, real stereotypes, real bigotry, real fear in people, and it is confirming their beliefs. So when you kind of make jokes about gay men in that context, in the context of a society where gay men are extremely discriminated against, where there's very high suicidality, where a lot of gay men are being killed simply for being gay, instilling those kind of jokes in people, it normalises it, it makes it more acceptable for people to believe that they can think that way, or that it's funny, or that they can joke about it. And therefore, as a result, it backs up those societal factors and societal forces that allow people to get away with literally beating gay men, lynching gay men, killing gay men. Because again, it instills a kind of normalcy about it. It becomes something that's somewhat humorous. And that's really the distinction between making those kind of jokes in 2022, whether it's making them in 1952. The fact that it is societally acceptable. And of course, that's been a somewhat directed analogy. The reason that it's not okay to make such jokes about trans women, particular jokes about them being predatory, kind of making fun of and invalidating their gender identity, is because those beliefs are in vogue. There are a significant number of people who not only believe it, but take it very much to heart, that trans women aren't women, that trans women are creepy, that trans women are men, that trans women are ugly, that trans women are disgusting, that trans women are groomers, that trans women are predatory, that trans women are paedophiles, that trans women are trying to get in schools, that trans women are X. So when these kind of jokes are made about trans women in 2022 in the exact same way that if a joke was to be made about a gay man in 1952, it does very directly put trans lives in danger, because people come away from watching that, whether it be in real life, on YouTube, whatever it may be, having that kind of bigotry and that kind of idea reinforced in their minds, made normal, made funny, made humorous, made not serious, where the idea of committing violence against trans women and the very real oppression and bigotry and transphobia that trans women have to go against in society is diminished, and it's made a laughing matter. And I think, although this may sound very blunt and almost ridiculous to some people, this does make people who make these kind of jokes very publicly and openly, like Ricky Gervais, complicit in the murder and the death of trans women. Of course, I wouldn't say that they were directly responsible for it. That's a bit harder to make an argument for or prove. But by reinforcing these ideas, not necessarily one person like Ricky Gervais making a joke, although given his audience, given his prevalence, you could even make an argument for that some people will die as a result of this that wouldn't have died. But rather, I'm not really going for Ricky Gervais particularly. I'm not really attacking him or his show or his skit. I'm really kind of analysing this and tackling this as a kind of wider social phenomena that, in a wider sense, whether they be comedians who are on a big stage or just kind of normal people, like in their houses, kind of making up their own jokes, laughing about this, making fun of this. This kind of humour, this kind of comedy, these kind of transphobic jokes do very much instill a sense of normalcy about these ideas. They do instill them in people, and as collateral damage from that, the transphobic laws that we've been seeing, they're easier to get past, they're easier to get through, because people do have a sense that this kind of transphobia is normal, that is acceptable, that you can joke about it. More trans women are in danger, their lives are in danger, transphobia, general bigotry. Again, it just becomes more normal and more prevalent. So whether it's people will say, Ricky Gervais or any comedian, he's a guy that will joke about anything and everything. Well, it's okay to joke about most things, really, when you're going about, and again, it's not particularly intrinsic to trans women or anyone. It's a society thing. It's not intrinsic to that thing that he's making fun of. It's rather the societal preconceptions and misconceptions around it. It's the fact that there is kind of this infrastructure working against trans women, and that he's not necessarily building it but reinforcing it. And that is the problem. Not only is he punching down, which makes the joke somewhat problematic in itself, he's punching down to a group that has been institutionally suppressed, kind of attacked, had laws put against them, and so on a systematic level. And by doing this, it doesn't really matter what Ricky Gervais's personal views are, whether he's personally transphobic or not. Again, he is the kind of guy who makes fun of every and any group. I personally couldn't care less if his kind of thoughts and own ideas are transphobic. What he is doing is not only transphobic, but again, on a wider scale, he is complicit. Again, very dramatically, but nonetheless, definitely so, he's complicit in the deaths on trans women by upholding these kind of stereotypes.